Hello and welcome to This Week in Agriculture, a presentation of the Communications Unit, Ministry of Agriculture. I'm a producer and host, Christopher Holder. On this week's presentation, we focus on a problem the Ndia has been facing for a number of years. And according to the engineers there, it is time to put a stop to this practice by farmers. We'll tell you all about what this is. It is farmers taking matters into their own hands and tampering with the irrigation structures of the Ndia. So a farmer wakes up in the morning and he decides, you know what, I need some water. So he goes to the particular DNI structure and he opens it, lets in water for himself. The water will go to other people who may not need it, damaging their stuff. The Ndia has gone so far as to put padlocks on some of these structures. Farmers have gone so far as to attach tractors to the structure and hollow the door. There's a practice where farmers put a water pump. They're pumping water from an irrigation channel into their cultivation, but the hose, the tube that they're using to transfer the water stops halfway across a dam. But, you know, they need water in the farm, so they just let the water run across the dam. What the water does, because of the force it's going across the dam with, it cuts that dam and damages the dam. That's a state property. The NDIA frowns upon this practice, and as you will hear, a whole host of other practices. Now, the law is clear as it relates to state property and especially the National Drainage and Irrigation Act as it relates to structures within the agriculture sector, in agricultural areas and so on. You can face fines and jail time once you're charged and found guilty. So we'll hear all about this in this presentation of This Week in Agriculture. This Week in Agriculture is produced for television by Matrix Video Productions and Advertising based in East Berbice. We will be back after these messages.
Rabies is a disease that is almost always fatal, but is 100% preventable. It is a disease that affects humans and all other warm-blooded animals. The GLDA wishes to stress that a rabies outbreak can result in the deaths of the animals, inclusive of horses, cattle, and small ruminants, leading to economic losses. Further, rabies is a zoonotic disease and can be transmitted to humans, resulting in fatalities. The GLDA is urging cattle farmers, especially those in regions 2, 3, 6, and 9, to vaccinate all their animals that are 3 months and older against rabies immediately and on a yearly basis. A message from the Guyana Livestock Development Authority, Ministry of Agriculture.
The Hydromet Service Ministry of Agriculture is reminding owners of wells across the country that it is a legislative requirement to have their wells registered with the service, be it for domestic or commercial use. Getting your well registered is just a few clicks away. Visit the Hydromet website at hydromet.gov.gy and click on the well registration tab. Fill out the registration form there and then click the send button. It's that simple. Be reminded that before undertaking the establishment of a new well, a license to do so must first be sought from the Hydromet Department as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. The process for so doing is explained on the department's website. Click on the link for well registration and follow the directions. A message from the Hydromet Service, Ministry of Agriculture.
As harvest of the first crop of 2021 approaches, farmers of the MMA-ADA are being urged to honor the spirit of the partnership between them and government by making every effort to put a portion of their first crop earnings towards D&I and land rental charges. The MMA advises that farmers who are in arrears should visit the MMA-ADA head office at Onvawak as soon as possible and join the hundreds of farmers who have already entered into mutually agreed upon payment plans aimed at erasing their debt over the next few crops. Farmers of the scheme are reminded that while it's government's responsibility to provide the infrastructure that is conducive to and facilitates agriculture development, they too have a role to play. that of paying the rates fixed for D&I and land rental charges. Once both sides honor their obligations, then the partnership can be considered a success, spurring more development within the scheme. A message from the MMA-ADA Ministry of Agriculture.
The Guyana School of Agriculture, Guyana's premier institution for certificate and diploma education in agriculture, has opened its virtual learning platform to all students both in Guyana and abroad. 2-year programs now available are the Diploma in Animal Health and Veterinary Public Health, Diploma in Agriculture. The certificate program over 1 year are those offered in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and agro-processing. Entrance requirements and other relevant information to get you started on your career in agriculture can be found on the GSA website, gsa.edu.gy, or email gsa.campus@gmail.com. The Guyana School of Agriculture, with its main campus at Monrepo, East Coast Demerara, and at Cottonfield, Essequibo. Let's get you started in the business of agriculture. In 2020, the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority, NDIA, spent just over $8 billion in clearing drainage and irrigation channels, fixing broken down D&I structures, and in many cases installing new structures, all aimed at improving irrigation in farmlands and coastal co-efficiency as it relates to drainage. The authority has also been engaged in the upgrades of dam and farm-to-market roads in communities across the country. In the 2021 national budget, just approved in the National Assembly, the NDIA has been handed the budget of just over $12 billion for its works this year. The NDIA is, however, reporting a worrying trend by selfish and irresponsible individuals in certain farming communities, that of tampering with the NDIA's D&I structures. This includes illegally opening or closing sluices and cokers, damaging structures by breaking locks, or has been the case using a tract and chain to wrench a sluice door off its hinges. This has occurred mainly in the East Demerara Water Conservancy area and in the Blackbush Polder and other areas under quarantine. Another practice is that of farmers pumping water into their rice lands for irrigation purposes, often using tubing that does not reach all the way across the dams, and water flows from the tube cutting a path in the dam into the farmer's field, damaging the dam, which is often the only way into the back dam. Damage to government reserves and dam are also being reported as being caused by roaming cattle and pigs, all offenses under the Drainage and Irrigation Act, punishable if convicted by monetary fines and imprisonment. Mr. Lester Pusod is the NDIA engineer managing the East Demerara Water Conservancy, EDWC. He says the problem of tampering with D&I structures is one of his biggest headaches.
This is Labon Mere. The farmers would usually refer to it as black coca, and it supplies irrigation water to the Cane Grove area. One of the issues we've been getting is from time to time, persons would come down here into the conservancy and regulate the door by themselves without giving any indication to management or requesting water, requesting for slow supply of irrigation. Usually what is done or what is required is if farmers see the need for increased irrigation or the contrary, they would make contact with us and we would do our assessments and regulate the door accordingly. Tampering with structures, especially this structure, can cause issues because from time to time the needs of the farmers, it revolves around the capacity of the conservancy and what is going on. So it is important for them to first make contact with us so we can make an assessment and regulate the doors.
Another structure in the EDWC that is often tampered with by farmers is the one at Shanks, the engineer explains.
Okay, so we are currently at Shanks. This irrigation structure supplies water to Mahaika, the Mahaika area. And this is another one of the structures that we've been getting difficulties with farmers to comply. They would come down here from time to time, take it on their own to open or close the structure. And this we've noticed has been happening primarily during the dry seasons. Because what happens, as much as you would see, everyone would look and say, oh, there's a lot of water in the conservancy. We work with levels, and the water is not always enough to supply farmers as they need, or as they want rather. So we have to regulate the amount of water that flows through the channels. So there would be times when the channels, the irrigation channels, would have water now. However, it might not be at the level to supply the lands by gravity flow. So the farmers, instead of assembling pumps to pump the water into the lands to irrigate it, they would come at the back here and open the structure to suit a level for them. We would like to plead with farmers to, instead of taking this route, contact the office. We have staff at the office on a 24/7 basis. You can contact the office on 257-0859 or 257-0860 and ask for any assistance you may require. We've been trying to put mechanisms in place over the years, and a number of years back we had implemented putting locking mechanisms on the gates so that persons couldn't tamper with it. But it went so far as the farmers coming at the back here and breaking the locking mechanisms. So in the future, we would not want this to continue. And I'm talking about a number of years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago. Make contact with us, and we'll see how best we can assist you.
Cattle farmers are also posing problems for the NDIA here, with cattle causing damage to access dams, including the Conservancy Dam itself.
The importance of the Conservancy revolves around a few key points, and one of the number one points is flood mitigation. This is an earthen embankment stretching primarily along the east coast of Demerara, and then it heads in a southern direction along the east bank of Demerara. Being an earthen embankment, it does not permit for cattle to traverse on it. During rainy season especially, farmers would allow their cattle to come on the embankment because it's a high area. This is not ideal for the embankment because over time, cattle cause significant damages to the embankment.
In Blackbush and the Quarantine in East Berbice, the instances of tampering with DNI structures and causing damage to dams and government reserves are many. Mr. C. Paul Rishi is a representative of the Water Users Association in that area. He took me into the problem areas for a first-hand look at what is taking place. This is a DNI structure that serves a particular purpose. On this side is irrigation, and across the dam here is drainage. However, farmers from the Blackbush frontlands, in pursuit of irrigation water, would interfere with the tubing here and pump water into the drainage channel over here so that the frontlands can access irrigation water in the dry period.
This is a tail end from the irrigation canal into the main drain. This is the farmer damages tubing to get water into the main drain. So this thing normally have a door in front. So when we close it for regulate the water for the Blackbush people got the water, the frontlands people can come and damage the structures to get water to the frontlands.
This is a problem that occurs in various parts of the Quarantine, illegal in every sense. Another problem being faced by the NDIA on the Quarantine and in other parts of the country is the incidence of rice farmers using inadequate tubing during the pumping of water into or out of their rice fields. Mr. Rishi explains.
The farmer pump the water from the collector drain into the fields, but they use a shorter path at the extension so the water remain and damage it down. We use a 30 feet extension delivery when you get into the field and don't cause this damage. So we got avoid damage in the access down.
In other areas of the Quarantine, errant cattle owners allow their animals to roam unattended, damaging reserves and dams, even entering rice fields and causing damage to crops. Along this dam in Blackbush Polder, cattle cross over to the other side by swimming across, and in the process of getting in and out of the water, cause significant damage to the edges of canals, and in the wet weather, the dams too. The culture of individuals taking up reserve land, as seen here, and engaging in farming is also an illegal practice that the NDIA intends to put an end to through the enforcement of the laws in relation to encroachment on government reserves. Building structures such as bridges across irrigation and drainage channels without the consent and supervision of the NDIA is also a widespread problem. As in erecting the structures, the individuals inadvertently reduce the flow of water at that point, resulting in problems. The National Drainage and Irrigation Act is very clear in its stipulation as to what constitutes tampering with DNI structures, encroachment in government reserve, recourse in the event of damage to structures and reserves occasioned by cattle and swine, etc. Mr. Chandan is the Ministry of Agriculture's legal officer, corporate secretary to the board of directors of the NDIA. He explained the laws as it relates to these issues.
Well, let me first start by saying that the issues with our drainage reserves is an age-old problem that has been affecting us for many, many years. And from where I sit, I think the issue is more of enforcement. Because if you look at the legislation itself, the Drainage Irrigation Act, there are provisions there whereby persons could be prosecuted for their actions. For example, Section 61 speaks specifically to the penalties that persons could incur as a result of their actions. For example, no one is supposed to obstruct an officer or a member or even an agent of the National Drainage Irrigation Authority from the execution of their duties. And I say that because there are many times when officers of the NDIA would speak to farmers, and of course, sometimes the dispute, it becomes very negative, even though the employer or the agent of us is just trying to do the work, for example, clearing a dam. As simple as that, because farmers may be planting on the dam, so we go to meet with the farmers, we indicate to them that we want to do works. But in some cases, they're not allowing us to do those works. So in a case like that, they're obstructing us from doing our work. So it carries a penalty, and the penalty is $25,000 and imprisonment for 3 months. Secondly, there's also provision whereby if the efficient operation of a work is being impaired, for example, like those persons who are building fences on dams, on reserves, whereby our excavators, our machinery cannot move on the dam, those persons are also liable to the same $25,000 and 3 months imprisonment. Section 61 B, in fact, speaks to that of the Drainage Irrigation Act. It even goes forward to say that if someone maliciously damages our infrastructure, that person would also be liable. And the same penalty they would incur as well, the $25,000 and 3 months imprisonment. But I also want to address the issue of whereby I think this just recently we had an issue in 5274, and I would have looked at the legislation, and from the legislation you would have seen that section 63 deals with the trespass by cattle. And first, if a person permits the cattle to be on the drainage irrigation infrastructure, that person will be liable to a fine of $5,000 and 3 months imprisonment. That's first. That's if we decide to go that course, because there are two courses that we could go. we could prosecute those persons, and secondly, we could impound the cattle. But I want to touch a bit on the impoundment because it's important. Because, like what have happened in 5274, where no authorization was given by the Ndia for impounding. But in a case like that, it's not like the farmers are left on their own, because in a case like that, the police, any police officer could be called within the jurisdiction to impound those cattle, or a rural constable could be called to impound and seize those animals and take them to the pound. Importantly as well, while I'm touching on the cattle situation, I just want to touch on how swines are being dealt with, because swines are dealt with quite differently. When swines are on our works, in fact, the axe is that those swine or pigs, as we would like to call them in Guyana, the correct name, of course, is swine. Those pigs, they can be destroyed, and the carcasses become the property of the NDIA. So it's quite different in comparison to cattle. Lastly, I just want to touch on liability. For example, I would have mentioned earlier that where persons would have maliciously damaged our infrastructure. In a case like that, the matter could be taken to the magistrate's court. And what would happen in a situation like that? The farmer would then, a certificate, let me start by saying, a certificate would be issued by the CEO of the National Drainage Irrigation Authority stating the amount of damage that was done and the expenses we would have incurred in repairing the damage done to our infrastructure. And we would then take that certificate to a magistrate. The matter could be taken to the magistrate's court, and that person would have to repay us for damage in force and for repairing as well. So there are adequate provisions in the Act, the Drainage Irrigation Act, as it is right now, but I believe enforcement is a...
The NDIA board is currently working on a policy of enforcement and will present this to the Minister of Agriculture in a short while.
Our board, or NDIA board, has taken up the matter, and they've actually asked us to put forward a policy within a month's time, a policy that's a very aggressive policy, so we can deal with the whole issue of drainage reserves throughout the country. But I think one of the things I would have recommended early on is public awareness. I believe we need to have more public awareness. Policies needs to be more aware that, look, don't build on the reserves, because at some point we'll want to use our reserves to get our work done. And I think it's become more like a custom, people go in our reserves. So I think we need to have countrywide public awareness. So I think over the next couple of months we might be rolling out a program on the radio, on the television. We might have some booklets coming out as well.
On the issue of persons building dwelling on dams and bridges across irrigation and drainage channels, Mr. Chandan said this is clearly spelled out in the Act.
I think over the years, I've worked with the NDA over 11 years, and this is a constant problem in terms of where there's a lot of housing development. We have that particular issue, because I can remember right now in Buxton we have a similar issue right now as I speak, well, first off, when you're building a bridge across our infrastructure or drainage irrigation, like a channel, one of our main channels, I think you have to you need to show us what is it you're going to build. And of course, you need approval from us, because we need to see the kind of infrastructure that you're building over our infrastructure. Because most of the time what you find happening is these bridges that are being built, the crevices at the bottom of the bridges are very small, and enough water, adequate water, cannot pass through for us to have maximum drainage in the area. And it's happening for a number of areas, especially like on the East Bank, we have that issue, but on the East Coast as well. But I would say East Bank more, because there are communities on the East Bank where lots of people would have built across the overall infrastructure, but they lay very narrow tubes or spaces, so water cannot flow in some instances. I can remember just recently, a couple of months in Monrico, we were called, and there was a very small drainage tube that was being inserted, and the entire community is being flooded out. So in an instance like that, we had to, the NDC, they gave us some assistance and they had to break out the tube just for the community to get drainage. But you could be liable as well, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, for obstructing the flow of water, or interfering the flow of water as well. And it also attracts a fine of $25,000 and 3 months imprisonment as well. So it's very serious. But of course, at Ndia, we are more community oriented. So you would find us trying to go out and explain to the farmers that, whatever you're doing, or the resident, and try to correct it before we take any form of action. So we try to be as amicable as possible.
Commenting on the issue, Agriculture Minister Zulfikar Mustafa said that government, through the NDIA, will be moving to first launch a nationwide education campaign to seek to inform farmers and residents that the DNI infrastructure is there for a specific purpose, and the reserve is called a reserve because it is. Land adjacent to dams, canals, and other DNI structures are used to conduct maintenance exercises through the provision of unimpeded access to machinery and equipment.
First of all, we have to continue to work with the farmers and the stakeholders within the community. I know for a fact that people have been tampering with our structure, the DNI structure, but it's a culture that exists within the industry, within the community. I have since asked NDIA to employ more rangers so that we can enforce the act. We can have people desist from doing and committing those acts. As a matter of fact, whenever I meet with farmers now, I'm advising them not to tamper with the DNI structure, not to interfere with our structure. But over the years, we have, as you rightly said, we have seen people interfering and causing serious problems in our structure. First of all, we'll launch an education across the farming community in the agriculture sector, and then we will start enforce the act and start prosecution, because we can't continue to spend millions of dollars and then people interfering and causing us a severe problem with these structures. So we'll launch an education drive, we'll work with farmers, but at the same time we'll also enforce the act to get it resolved.
The Guyana Livestock Development Authority, GLDA, is advising owners of horses to urgently report to the authority any signs of sickness on the part of their animals, especially if those signs include sprawled legs, walking in a circle, stumbling over obstacles, inability to stand, and head hanging close to the ground. These symptoms are consistent with a disease known as equine encephalomyelitis, which is transmitted to the horses through the bite of an infected mosquito. If you notice these symptoms in your horse, contact the GLDA immediately. The GLDA is urging owners of horses to ensure that their animals are vaccinated against this disease. However, it should be noted that these vaccines should only be sourced from registered veterinarians or from a licensed veterinary supplies outlet through a prescription issued by a registered veterinarian. No one should attempt to purchase this vaccine online or have it imported on their own, as this is illegal. A message from the GLDA, Ministry of Agriculture.
As harvest of the first crop of 2021 approaches, farmers of the MMA-ADA are being urged to honor the spirit of the partnership between them and government by making every effort to put a portion of their first crop earnings towards D&I and land rental charges. The MMA advises that farmers who are in arrears should visit the MMA ADA head office at Onvawak as soon as possible and join the hundreds of farmers who have already entered into mutually agreed upon payment plans aimed at erasing their debt over the next few crops. Farmers of the scheme are reminded that while it's government's responsibility to provide the infrastructure that is conducive to and facilitates agriculture development, they too have a role to play, that of paying the rates fixed for D&I and land rental charges. Once both sides honor their obligations, then the partnership can be considered a success, spurring more development within the scheme. A message from the MMA ADA Ministry of Agriculture.
Well, that's all the time we have in this week's edition of This Week in Agriculture, a presentation of the Communications Unit, Ministry of Agriculture. I'm your producer and host, Christopher Holder. Until next time then, be good to yourselves and to each other.